right, welcome everyone to the Flyte Contributors Meetup. Today is July 6th. I'm David Spejon, happy to be your host today. A couple of reminders, this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be posted to the Flyte YouTube channel. And I'm also using Fathom AI service to capture notes. The meeting notes are capturing this document. Let me re-share this with you. And also, also we're saving copies in the community repo. You can add yourself to the attendance list, add your name and your affiliation. And also your questions or discussion topics. All right, new members joining today. I guess, yeah, we have a couple of new folks joining. Let's start with Dennis. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Dennis. I'm an MLOps engineer at Recognize, so the same as Fabio is, and only made a small contribution to Flyte so far, but like joining today because we have an open discussion around preemption handling or interruptible handling in Flyte.
Okay,
and
great.
Yeah, I love using Flyte. It's a great tool. Really, thanks a lot for all the work you put in there.
All right, now thanks to you for your contributions. That's great. Okay, let me see. I have someone trying to join, also for the first time. Right, I guess that's it so far in terms of new members. Okay, let's go directly to the RFC board. I'll share my screen here. All right. So I guess no new RFCs this week. We have some proposals in review. So wondering if for any of this, do you have anything to discuss for the eager mode, Flyte console UI, or overridable defaults proposals? Is there anything you'd like to discuss here? I don't see anything in the agenda.
But from my side, at least the last one can be moved to the next column.
This one?
Honestly, I feel like all of them can, because some of them already have approvals.
Yeah, for those of you who are not aware, the final comment period here is where we move proposals that already have undergo sufficient discussion from the community, and the community feels in a position to make a decision to either accept or reject. And yeah, for most of them, already conversation happened. So any objection to move this to the final comment period, all three proposals? No. Again, even during the final comment period where comments are welcome, right? That's the idea of the FCP. Okay, and also just one neat comment here, the external plugin service proposal that is not yet merged. It doesn't have yet the approvals, but I think it's already in the implementation phase. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, just to keep enforcing the RFC process, I would appreciate reviewers to give your approval so we can merge this and reflect the current status. Okay. Great. Next up, working group updates. Is there any update this week for the, especially for the config overrides working group?
Still trying to understand where an admin that needs to be done. I looked a bit further, but I mean, nothing worth reporting here.
Okay.
Complicated the logic.
Yeah, similar from my end. We also
Pajama doing a quarter wrap up at the moment, so there's a lot going on, and should be a bit easier the next couple of weeks. I've looked into the code as well, that both Dan and I think there were 2 comments that were posted, but yeah, I have not played around with it yet.
All right, great, thank you. Thanks so much. Sorry, grunt up. Okay, and yeah, welcome, Maria. Finally, you were able to join. Great to have you here.
Hi. Yes, sorry, I had to install Zoom.
All right, great. Yeah, we'll discuss your question in a little bit. Okay. Next up, new ideas in the incubator. We have a couple of them. So I guess if Dan, I think I saw Dan, if you wanted to briefly introduce this proposal, this idea.
Sure. Yeah, we can be very succinct about this. Yeah, the feedback mechanism from Flyte to Propeller is kind of blocking a number of different efforts right now. So this is just a kind of back of the envelope idea of leveraging pod logs to do it. Comments are very warranted, validated. The trade-off space between containers having lots of logs, things like that. Kind of just using this as a segue to fuel this conversation. I think we need to come up with a decent solution for this. It'd be great to kind of have a discussion.
Right, thank you. Any comment? No?
Keaton and I commented about performance. Not sure if I can fully judge it, but the number of logs that can be produced by ML training is insane, right? Can be millions of lines of logs if people put it into debug mode to figure out what's happening. And I wonder what happens if somebody does that. So we recently had a spike in logging because somebody just said debug logging for NCCL, and that produced hundreds of millions of log lines in one day. And I fear that that would bring down Propeller for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that there's a number of mitigations we can have there. One, like Propeller horizontally shards beautifully. We haven't had a use case for it yet. This would be a decent use case. I think in any sane production environment, this tens of millions of lines of logs, right? This isn't going to be a regular thing we see in production. At least hopefully it isn't. Very well could be. I had a thought process of do we have some kind of warning message that we have a maximum number of log lines where Propeller uses this for, that if it gets over 10,000, some configurable limit, we can say hey, in the reasons on the task, say we quit looking at them. I think there's a number of mitigations. I think, pub sub, like you suggested, Fabio, is I think that's a perfect end goal. I think everybody agrees that would be a fantastic feature. But the introduction and complexity on the infra side, I think, has been a real reason why we haven't gone that route so far. So I just want to make sure we exhaust options before diving into something that we might not want to do.
I agree that the infra setup is complicated enough. I would argue, though, that many people use Flyte not in a production setting, but for experimentation. And at least as far as from what I have seen, producing a large number of log lines is not very uncommon.
Sure.
But yeah, I agree that maybe we could limit the number of lines for which when we stop considering this mechanism.
Right. I imagine if we're using this for WAN-DB links, we're using this for flight decks, we're using it for things like that. The first 2,000 lines and the last 2,000 lines would be where these things would happen. You're not frequently going to have stuff happening. So it gets hackier and hackier as we start to introduce things like this. But for the 99 or the 95% case where we're going to emit 100 lines of logs for a task, this seemed like a decent proposal. But like I said, I do completely understand the use case where this could get out of control quickly, and maybe it doesn't fit those as well.
Is there a reason why it's not possible to implement a direct communication channel between Flyte and the Propeller?
There's always been a hindrance to do that, just because multiple cluster deployments get dicey. Communication between all that gets a little bit dicey. So going from Flyte kit directly to Propeller is a difficult thing to do, just because of deployment models, basically.
Wouldn't it be enough if every pod, like when every pod that runs in the cluster will have also Propeller in its cluster, right? Even
Not
if there are multiple ones. No?
Propeller doesn't have to be run inside of a cluster, right? Like it just has to have a Kubernetes client connected to a cluster.
Okay, I think I need to look at how exactly
there was like
deployment options work with multi-cluster. My understanding was that you always need you don't need an admin, but you need a Propeller. That was what I understood. But I'm probably wrong about this. Okay.
the issue would probably like equally explode, but maybe like we need something like a communication proxy then in each cluster, at least like that there's at least a minimal Flyte component that has to be there.
Yeah, I think this is the same vein as introducing some kind of pub subsystem, right? Where it's just it just increases the complexity of deployment. But I agree, a potential solution. I mean, I think I'm open to all conversation on this. I think, like I said, just getting this right the first time is easier, and then it feels a lot of these things like configurable log links, where we'd love to do that at runtime and runtime metrics, things like that.
All right. Well, thank you all. Yeah, encouraging everyone to add your comments here. And yeah, I think we have a whole new wave of new RFCs coming from the incubator. Also, an additional entry.
It's not new, but last time we agreed that basically we would talk about it this time. But the question is whether you feel prepared to talk about it, because I think it's about nitty-gritty details. I saw that you read it, Dan. Is there any questions that you have about it, or?
I love it. Let's make retries make sense. No, I support all of it. I think putting this behind a flag. I think it's the right way to go about it. So, like I said, there'll be a lot of technical aspects on implementation level. I think it would be good to have a couple more eyes on this just to get it. But I agree. I fully support this work. And like I said, throwing it behind
the flag. You mean
flag
to make it backwards compatible, or?
Yeah. I think changing the default behavior is my only concern, because some users be relying on what the current behavior is in this. So if it changes transparently, there's going to be issues there.
That's true. And do you have an opinion on whether you would prefer to just have a single retry behavior, or giving the information of the underlying pods to the plugins that until now only deal with the custom resource definitions? These are the two opposing ideas that we proposed in this RFC.
I don't feel strongly. I think because the biggest difficulty here is with like the PyTorch. There's this level of indirection between like the custom resource for the kubeflow operators, right? That's I understand that correctly. I'm trying to recall when I read it last, and just that interruptible behavior is not necessarily propagated through the custom resource and brought through there. What do you think?
So, in our opinion,
like something.
Kenneth, do you want to go, or?
Yeah, it's just something I wanted to add there is that what we saw a lot, that at least myself, at least like a little bit puts me towards like the first or was it the first one? Like the one where we would unify the system retry budget and the user retry budget, is that we saw a lot of our users don't really understand the Flyte retry mechanism completely. They see the user retry budget as like something you can configure in your own code and kind of expect that this covers all retries. but only when we talk about like what the system actually does in the background, they then learn about the system retry budget, and that maybe due to like a bug or like at least non-expected behavior, it works differently whether you have like a distributed task or whether it's just a single Python function task. And it's just very hard to understand, which I think we also saw like here in the discussions, how this really works in detail. And I think it would greatly simplify it, especially I would be also curious, you probably know that better, like where people actually use the user retry budget specifically, like throwing this user retryable error and want Flyte to retry that, because like from our thoughts, this could mostly also happen all in the user code, this retry behavior.
Yeah, and I know there's a couple other people. I don't want to put Yi on the spot here, but you might have a little bit more context than I do on this regard. You know, retries was a thing that started out initially basically just for like interruptible pods, right? You know, the whole notion of retries in Flyte was like, hey, we have this task that runs, it gets destroyed in the background, we'll automatically retry that. And then like the integration of recoverable failures. And then there's this, you know, partition as well, that not just the recoverable and non-recoverable, but also the system and the user, and that, you know, introduce all of this complexity. Like I said, I like the idea of, you know, just making the partition a recoverable failure and a non-recoverable failure, and then that can be decided by like Flyte about, you know, whether this should be retried or not retried, and just do away with the system retry mechanism. I just have, you know, one budget. Here's, you get 5 retries or whatever specified, and then you know, if a failure is recoverable, we allocate it towards that. As far as how that applies to like the Kubeflow PyTorch stuff is a little bit more complex.
Actually, if we go that route, doesn't matter anymore that the Kubeflow operator doesn't propagate this information, right? It's a failure. It comes against the user retry budget.
Sure, and then it would just be if it's recoverable or non-recoverable. You know, would you decide that all of them would be recoverable, or how would you handle that case?
That's a good question.
Dan, I have a question.
Yeah, we would have to see all as recoverable.
Yes.
I have
The thing
a
is-
question.
Which is probably also not completely right, yeah.
What I was wondering, so I've been doing, talking to a lot of users, and one of the things that came up around retries was that for most people, that's not a very human-friendly thing. Like, much more is like, I need this task to start by this date, this time. Like, so I was just wondering about, I don't want to derail that, but that's kind of the feedback I got was like, retries doesn't mean anything to me as a person. Like, I'm more in terms of time. Like, when does this have to get done? And so I'm wondering about,
I think it's something different.
Thinking about that a little bit as a like being able to expose to users that kind of a thing.
I mean, I think that's valid, but I think it's a different feature in Flag, right?
Well, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because like I specifically got a couple of people saying to me like I don't understand, or like that have to set retries. Like I just like, and it makes it harder for me to, like, in other words, there could be tasks that are not that time sensitive. Like, hey, if this gets done in the next day, I'm fine. But there's no way for a person to specify that. They have to think in terms of retries.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure I understand that, Tim, and I don't want to derail this conversation. We'll come right back to it. But like, that would be like, here's this task in the definition, say it needs to run in one day, and there will be unlimited retries just as long as it runs in one day. Is that kind of the idea behind it?
Yeah, that's that I got, and like the linkage was for people to be able to, like, that's a much more like interruptible task, up to some point at which Flyte goes, okay, I now need to get this done, so I can't put it on I can't put it on a spot instance. I have to put it on something dedicated.
Oh, interesting. Okay, now I understand what you mean.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, we can certainly write up, like, add it to the RFC incubator. There's constructs internally in Flyte that, like, we have what's called a retry mechanism defined at the task level. And right now the retry mechanism is pretty simple, of just like, here's the number of retries that it has, but we could extend that certainly to be like, here's a more complex retry mechanism that's not just a number. It's more so defined by like, here's a time, something like that. You'd have to look at implementation wise, but like I said, I think Fabio, like it's a little bit of a different than what this problem is exactly, right?
In my opinion, the biggest argument for a single retry budget is that, let's take, for example, out of memory errors. I would really have to look into the Go code to figure out against which budget they are counted. I don't think there's a way to figure this out other than that. And that's just an example, right? There are other errors where I really couldn't tell without going through the code what they count against. And I think that people, when they see the argument in the task decorator, I think most people would assume that everything counts against that, and then are surprised when it doesn't. No.
Yeah, maybe I have to do a deeper dive there too, because I think system retries, like I said, it's supposed to be like, interruptible failures on pods and things like that, but I think it also encompasses like during node executions where like you're doing a cache lookup or something like that. That would be a system retry, where instead of just like, hey, if propeller fails to do a cache lookup, that doesn't then that just counts against that as well. But I would have to double check that, to be honest with you.
Okay. And if that is true, then maybe I would rephrase what we wrote here and say every reason that everything that makes the pod fail counts against a single retry budget, right?
Right.
That's maybe then what the scope would be. Like, of course, there can be things going wrong in propeller that are not the user retry budget, but everything that happens to the pod, basically, I could imagine we count against one budget.
Dan, you know how we sometimes see the error message, like 51 out of 50 retries exhausted, and then the pod fails? Do we have any sense of how many times, how often, like things retry like 20, like is there a histogram of that? Do you have any idea? Like something retry 20 times or 30 times and then succeeded because I don't know, Cube API was flaky or something else was flaky. But like is the dispersion of like system retries is like substantially different than it may be like it may be just like a different class of errors that is worth keeping a separate counter for.
Yeah, I don't have any numbers on that, but I can't imagine it's a normal distribution, right? If you have 20 retries, it's going to succeed on the first 1, 2, 3, or it's going to go through all 20 and fail, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think my only user-facing comment on this is the same as last time, which is if like I would like to be able to mark a task as interruptible without having to specify retries at all. And as long as that works, either even if it's handled by Flyte is fine, but like from the user's perspective, you should be able to mark a task as interruptible without a retry.
Yeah, I think that's dissimilar to the kind of feedback I've been getting.
What would the desired behavior then, though, that it's like, how many times do you want it to be retried then?
A reasonable number of times.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's like this is also an argument we're bringing up here, that maybe this should be like the default, should be a cluster setting, or at least something the admins can decide.
Yes.
I think
the feedback that I'm getting is that retries are not, it's not a very intuitive thing. And when you think about it, in my experience,
it's not an argument against retries,
right? Like usually like something will tell you like I'm retrying, but like I don't ever have to worry about that, or it'll tell me network failure timed out, but no one ever asked me how many times I want to retry.
Yeah, I have a question regarding what you said, but I only want to ask it if nobody wants to respond to something that Tim said, to what Tim said. So
we were just saying there's another use case, or there is maybe a real life use case is when if there isn't a spot instance available. Like we've had users tell us like, I want to introduce like some delay after every retry, like some type of a back off period between retries. But the real root of the issue is like, they just want to ultimately what Tim said, like they're willing to wait. So totally, again, probably totally different subject. My guess is even if we do some future feature where we say you don't specify retries, you specify a time or like a window, that would build on this, what this is talking about, which is like a system default number of retries that or like, I guess, a unified budget of retries, right? So I think you ultimately probably need this in the system still.
What would you say to a scenario where there is a default for the number of retries configured on the platform side, and we make in the literal of let's say if we make the task argument, the retry argument in the task decorator, if that, sorry, I need to take a step back. So if we could distinguish in the backend, the user didn't set a retry budget in the task decorator, so we use the platform one, or the user set one in the task decorator, let's use that one. It would have to be a one-off probably in the protobuf then. But that would solve that problem, right? So the user sets interruptible equals to true, doesn't specify any retry budget, so we go for the platform defined one. Or that they set one explicitly in the task decorator, then we use that one.
If interruptible is not set to true, we still just use the platform retries?
No, I'm saying there is a single budget that has a default on the platform side, and it will be used if the user doesn't set it in the task decorator. And if the user explicitly sets it in the task decorator, then we use that number.
Sure. I was actually just looking, pulled it up right now because I was like, it should be how we do it by default, but if it's not, I can take a look here.
I think that's fine. I just want to make sure that existing code doesn't break. Like users.
No, I mean, we definitely discussed this in the RFC here, that there needs to be a flag in the Helm values that says like normal behavior or new behavior, so that this isn't a breaking change. And the new behavior wouldn't have to be probably wouldn't be the default, right?
I think we need to think about this some more. Like
absolutely, fair point.
My concern, I guess, is the deprecating system retries. I feel like that's kind of embedded everywhere in lots of places, like Flyte, Propeller, and ripping that out completely. I don't know what the impact of that is, so I want some way of assessing. I think we need some way of understanding what that impact is and how hard that will be to do.
I did find here too, like Propeller has a default max attempts field, but it's not exposed through configuration. So it's just hard coded to 1 right now. It would be a really easy change to expose that through configuration. And then every task you could say, give it a default 3 or whatever.
All right. Any other comment about this proposal?
Is there anything that we can do to try to figure this information out? I think for us it will be very hard to get an overview of how difficult it will be to remove that budget completely. I think something that we could look into is whether what you addressed, Dan, that there is this cache of all the statuses of the pods, whether we can just put the other pods in there as well, which would also allow us to unify the behavior, right? Maybe is it okay for you if I ping you on Slack then, so that maybe you can give me some guidance of where in the code that is, and then we do an experiment and see whether that would be an option.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's explore that.
Okay.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, we're running short on time for this section. So yeah, thank you all for your input. Next up, in what we call for now community polls, where we try to discover patterns or trends in the community, recurring issues, feature requests, etc. that are worthy to discuss here. Today we are bringing here what we call the sensor mechanism idea. It all started on this thread. And this thread also brought Maria here with us. Welcome, great to have you. The idea of having a Flyte native mechanism for executing scheduled workflows based on delayed external upstream dependencies. There is a tangentially related entry in the incubator. But wondering, I don't know if Maria, do you want to elaborate more on the request?
Yes, I can do that. Maybe I can like give you a couple of use cases that we have. So this is not only about sensor mechanism. I think this is about sensor and concurrency, and they're related, but not necessarily the same thing. Can I share my screen? I can maybe show you.
Yeah, please.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it asked me to quit. Okay, is it okay if I'll be back in?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, sorry about that.
In the meantime, Fabio, you said Niels prepared a proposal on something like this.
Yeah, I can't find it. I'm searching in the IRC incubator, but it
Trying to find. He created a bunch of entries. But yeah,
reactive execution graphs. Yeah, there is one for this one here. Right. If I understood correctly what this is about.
Reactive execution graphs.
Yeah, with like triggers on certain events.
Yeah, it seems similar. Okay. Yeah, in the meantime, I guess we can touch on. Oh, yeah, Maria's back.
You're muted.
Yes, I'll try to be quick.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is one example. Very simple pipeline. Given some date input, we parse it, we read data from S3, and then we write data to S3. Reading and writing tasks are Spark tasks. So here everything is okay, everything works fine, but the problem occurs when we, for instance, try to backfill. So we will have multiple workflows running with different dates, but they will all try to write to the same S3 bucket. And since they're all Spark jobs, they will be ruining it for each other. They will be deleting each other's temporary files, and you'll end up with corrupted data. So this is one way this can happen, and another way would be if you just accidentally trigger the workflow several times. So here what we would want to do is to not allow the writing task have parallel runs. Some global lock, while the first writing task is running, the other writing tasks are queued once it's released.
That feature exists, right? Isn't it called cache serialize?
Does it work when tasks have different? So these will have different inputs.
Okay, that probably won't.
So yeah, I guess yeah, if it's triggered accidentally the same, then cache serialize will work. But if it's backfilling, then I guess then it won't work. That's one, and I can quickly show another one. Here, the problem is when we have a frequent schedule. So this is like a dummy example of a pipeline. Multiple external dependencies, and these are also S3 files or multiple files. They arrive on different times, anything between midnight or 8 a.m. Latencies are not uncommon. So we have frequent schedule. Right now we have a cron job that runs every 20 minutes. But we also have long running tasks. So let's say the first file arrived, on the next schedule kick in, the workflow started. It is executing task 1. Nothing else is running because there is no the external dependency for task 2 is not fulfilled yet. But since we have this schedule kicking in, we don't want concurrent workflow runs. So what we want is just to wait till the next dataset arrives and start the second task. And as far as we understood right now, this is not possible because if we have a launch plan with a cron schedule to run the workflow every, I don't know, several times an hour, and we have this case, then we will be just creating a new workflow every time.
Do I understand correctly that you don't want to create a new execution if there is one that is still running?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I can stop sharing. That was it. So that was on concurrency side. On sensor side, yeah, as I showed, we have many of our pipelines have external upstream dependencies, and right now the majority of our pipelines use Luigi framework, and there is this functionality to use external task. You can invoke the external dependencies, external task, and then there is a mechanism to check if the success files exist, meaning the external task is completed, and then you can, depending on if it's completed or not, you can start executing your pipeline. And this is something we also couldn't figure out yet how to do in Flyte. We sort of the workaround we did is just to add a task that will be checking if the file exists or not. And depending on that, we have a conditional to either run the workflow or have like a dummy task to log the message and exit successfully. But in the case where we have many external dependencies, that can become more complex. So I don't feel like our solution will scale for the cases where we have many external dependencies. That was on the sensor part.
Is there a RFC or incubator discussion for this?
I haven't seen anything on the sensor part, but on the concurrency, I think there is. Well, there was an issue for parallel runs, workflow runs, and I think there is also RFC.
Yeah, I just linked one of the locking mechanism to prevent 2 or more workflow tasks running in parallel that was submitted to RFC Incubator last month. This is a feature that we've wanted to, that cache serialized stuff, we've wanted to generalize that for quite some time. And I think, upvote it. Hopefully we can get some movement on this, because I think it's something a lot of people are using. The general discussion here is serializing scheduled executions. I think the second use case that you had shown is a much simpler problem than generalized serialization between like task executions. And so, just the amount of effort that it would take, I think we don't have a good scope on it right now. So one problem's easier, but certainly, serializing everything, supporting it across task executions and things like that is a lot more powerful. Honestly, I can't comment intelligently on it.
Yeah, I think for the first use case that I showed, I don't think we thought about well, actually, for the first use case where we need to backfill, I think the workaround right now is just to have a Python script that will manage that. And that is, I guess, for now, okay. But for the second use case, yeah, we haven't thought about cache serializations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Maria, for preparing the diagrams and everything. Right, any other comment?
I think a written version in the RFC Incubator would help. It's difficult to come up with a solution for me.
For both sensor and
I mean, for the log one, we already have one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe comment what you would miss, and if that one was implemented, what you would be missing. That would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Great. Let's move to a couple of items in the open mic questions section. There's a nomination for a new contributor. Share my screen real quick. And Kevin, I think, is the first person who used the template in the community repo to nominate a new contributor, outlining the contributions and the repos, etc. It already has a couple of votes, but it requires a couple of additional votes to be approved. So please take a look. Thank you, Fabio. All right. Next one is related. I submitted a PR with some updates to the contributor ladder or the governance model. I won't read them, and thank you, Fabio, for the comments. Yeah, really fair observations. That's great. The overall idea is to introduce a new role that it sits in between of the general community member and the contributor with right and permissions. It was a higher barrier for access, so the collaborator role fits right in the middle. And I really think that we need to not only nurture a community of collaborators and contributors, but also give them resources to help with all the tasks that are defined there. Also, in the previous version of the governance model, some of the responsibilities were not really well defined. So we're trying to address this here and also touch on the current status of the maintainer role. Right, so please give it a read and add your comments. And yeah, finally, type support for Pydantic-based models. I guess this
Yeah,
is
Arthur and Fabio, I guess. So I asked Tatham also. The only concern that we both had is around the scalar literal map. I don't think it's a clear cut shoe-in the sense that it will take some validation probably to get that in, if that makes sense. Sorry, I didn't even read your comments or your response. But perhaps I should have.
If you're referring to mine, that was very briefly before the meeting. The TLDR of what I wrote is we don't have at least I don't have a strong opinion how the literal should look like as long as we fit the information in there. So if I'm very open to another shape of the literal, to put it this way.
Is it possible to put everything into one struct?
I need to ask a dumb question. Would that correspond to basically putting everything in a single dictionary in Python and then putting it into one struct? Is that correct?
Yes.
If the single dictionary can have two keys, and basically we just currently we have two structs, we could put it in one if the first dictionary in the struct would have just two keys and then two other dictionaries.
Why is it necessary for, like, what purpose does the separation serve? I guess I never really got that.
Yeah, so maybe Arthur, do you want to explain that one, or?
Sure. So is that the separation between the Flyte objects and the base model JSON itself?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Pydantic serializes to JSON. It doesn't really serialize to other formats. And then Flyte has support for some things that Pydantic can't serialize. For instance, tensors or pandas data frames and so on. So the problem started with the Flyte files and Flyte directories, which pretty naturally would fit in as just strings into the Pydantic serialization. But then because they abstract the access to that directory or file, we had to add in the serializer and deserializer from Flyte to be able to grab those things correctly. And then the idea came, what about just adding everything from Flyte? So supporting every Flyte file and like Flyte object, including the pandas data frames, etc. But then we have to serialize separately the base model and the Flyte objects because the Flyte objects get serialized to protobuf and the Pydantic base model gets serialized to JSON. So then the solution was to separate out the Flyte objects, just pick them out of the base model, serialize them separately, and then during deserialization, we deserialize them with the Flyte transformers and put them back into the base model wherever they belong. So that's why they're separated, because the base model, everything supported by Pydantic gets serialized to JSON, and then there's just placeholders for those objects that get serialized with the Flyte transformer.
Okay, I think I need to look at this again, but even if it serializes to protobuf, a couple of things, you can still like somehow binary represent, maybe it's not space sufficient, but you can binary represent the protobuf inside a Pydantic JSON, right? And I think most of the objects, if not all of the offloaded objects currently today, like the files, directories, pandas data frames, they also serialize to JSON. They're like, it will first serialize to protobuf, but there is a JSON representation of the object.
Right. So that would be a possibility to just check in the JSON representation of those objects into the base model itself. Yeah, I don't think that would make much difference in the current, like that could be configured to do that rather than have them outside. I personally thought it would be more elegant to have a placeholder rather than a really large string inside the base model representation, because then the schema is more evident from looking at it. On the other hand, yeah, then we have the objects in two places now that we're taking the Flyte types out.
Yeah, okay. I think it's fine as long as it's if it's like one object that contains these two objects together, as long as it is a scalar struct, I think I would be a lot more comfortable. The split part is you're kind of like, it also serves as like a decision, not decision, but like it tells the transformer like when to, like everything that's stored in that separate object is and should be invoked, like it should invoke the flight kit type engine, right? So it's kind of using that also as like a as a determining mechanism, right?
That is right. Yeah.
At least on the
And I think, yeah, it saves the assumption that things can be represented in the base model. Now, of course, we could always like put as worst case a binary into the serialized base model, but in some sense there's a separation in serialization and deserialization logic that Pydantic supports everything that can be written to JSON, and then in case Flyte supports something that can only be written to protobuf like binary, then that would be in that separate store rather than be put into as the base model as a string.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. Let me read the response just and I think I had one more concern, but yeah, let me read the response to this, and I will we can continue to async.
Okay, great. Yeah, question from Bernard. Is this PR affected by Pydantic version 2?
And as it currently stands, it should not change the logic. There is support in that there's a different keyword for getting the validators from the base model in V2, and we check for that in the top of which Pydantic version is currently used.
Okay.
That said, though, I think that part could deserve some hardening. To me, it's still a bit up in the air what Pydantic V2 exactly is going to look like. I don't know if is it in alpha release currently, or
no, it came out I think this week or so. We saw we had some missing version pains and it like broke a couple of things. So if you want to try, I think it's out.
Okay.
So, yeah,
that's great. Okay, that's a relief. That's perfect timing. So then let me make sure that it runs as expected then when I actually add it in.
All right, that's great. Hey, seems like that's it in terms of the agenda. Anything else you'd like to cover here in 5 minutes or less? Nope. All right, so with that, thank you all for your time. It was great to see you. Hope to see you in the next one.
Thanks.
Bye.
thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.